What if I told you that a quiet night in a small-town diner would change 3 lives forever? That a single dad, a war veteran carrying silent scars, would stand up to a powerful man, only to discover that the woman he protected was no ordinary waitress, but the daughter of a billionaire hiding from the weight of her last name. This isn't just a story about confrontation. It's about courage, dignity, and how the smallest act of decency can ripple through lives in ways no one expects. Stay with me until the end, because this is one of those stories that reminds us of the kind of people we all hope to be. Jack was a man people noticed, but not because he wanted them to. Broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who'd been trained to stand tall, he carried himself quietly, keeping his head down in the world. He had seen war. He had seen loss. Now, his battles were far simpler but no less demanding, raising his 7-year-old daughter alone after his wife passed away years before. She was his reason for breathing, the anchor that kept him from sinking when memories of darker days tried to drag him under. That night, the rain fell steady outside as Jack sat in his favorite booth at the corner of the diner. His daughter slept beside him, curled up in a blanket, her little hand resting on his arm. The glow of the neon sign flickered in the window, and for a moment life felt almost peaceful. He nursed a cup of coffee, eyes wary but calm, content to let the silence fill the space. The waitress on shift was young. Her smile seemed practiced but warm enough to be believable. Jack had noticed how she glanced at the clock every now and then, maybe waiting for her shift to end, maybe waiting for something more. She carried herself with grace, but her hands trembled slightly when she placed plates on tables, as though she wasn't used to this work. Jack, being observant by nature, caught it, but he wasn't the kind of man to pry. Everyone had their reasons for where life had put them. And then the peace broke. The bell over the door jingled, and in walked a man who instantly disrupted the air. He was tall, wearing a sleek, tailored suit that screamed money and arrogance. The type who thought the world was made to bend for him. He didn't just walk. He strutted, as if the small-town diner should feel privileged by his presence. He slid into a booth without asking, snapping his fingers for service like he owned the place. The waitress approached with the same polite smile, but Jack noticed the flicker of unease in her eyes. "What can I get you?" she asked softly. The man leaned back, smirking. "You can start by telling me what a pretty girl like you is doing in a dump like this. Don't you know you're wasting your time here? Someone like me could give you the life you deserve." The words oozed entitlement. She tried to deflect, offering him coffee and a menu, but he wasn't interested in food. His eyes roamed over her in a way that made Jack's stomach turn. "Don't play shy." The man pressed, his tone dropping lower, his hand brushing too close to hers. "Girls like you don't say no to men like me. Trust me, you'll thank me later." The waitress froze, her smile faltering. Her hands shook as she placed the coffee down, and for the first time, Jack saw real fear flash in her expression. Jack felt something old stir inside him. He had promised himself to stay out of trouble, to keep his head down for the sake of his daughter. But this wasn't a war he could ignore. His little girl shifted in her sleep beside him, clutching his sleeve. And he knew, if he stayed silent, what kind of man would he be teaching her to see? Jack pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the tiled floor. The sound cut through the tension, and both the waitress and the suited man turned. Jack's frame filled the space as he stood tall, his voice calm but edged with steel. She said no. The man blinked, then smirked, amused. "And what's it to you, old man? You her bodyguard?" Jack's eyes didn't waver. "Doesn't matter who I am." She said no. "That means you back off?" The diner fell silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. The waitress's lips parted, shocked by the stranger who had stepped in. The man in the suit, however, wasn't used to being challenged. He stood, puffing out his chest, trying to match Jack's imposing presence. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," the man sneered. Jack didn't flinch. His voice was steady, his body calm. But every inch of him radiated the quiet power of someone who had been in far worse situations. "I don't need to know. All I know is she's not interested. And if you're half as smart as you think you are, you'll walk away now." The arrogance wavered for just a moment as the man measured him. Jack's stance wasn't bluster. It was the kind of stillness that only came from a man who'd faced real danger and lived to tell the tale. With a final scoff, the man muttered under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence lingered. The waitress's shoulders sagged with relief, her hands still trembling as she whispered, "Thank you." Jack simply nodded, sliding back into his booth, his daughter shifting slightly but staying asleep. To him, it wasn't heroism. It was just what needed to be done. But that moment was only the beginning. The next day, Jack's act of quiet courage began spreading around town. But the story didn't stop there. Because the man in the suit wasn't just anyone. He was a wealthy developer, someone with influence, someone who wasn't used to being embarrassed, especially not in public. And the waitress, she wasn't who she appeared to be either. Jack didn't know it yet, but the young woman he defended wasn't just a struggling worker. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. She had left behind the golden cage of wealth, desperate to prove to herself she could live like an ordinary person, away from the spotlight, away from men like the one who had just harassed her. That night in the diner, their lives had intersected by chance. But fate wasn't done weaving them together. Because when the man in the suit returned, angrier than before, and threats began circling, Jack would once again be faced with a choice. Protect his quiet life for the sake of his daughter, or stand tall once more, risking everything, not knowing that the young woman he defended had the power to change his world forever. And this was only the beginning. The diner felt quieter after that night. But for Jack, life went on the same way it always did. He woke early, packed his daughter's lunch for school, and worked small jobs around town, anything to keep food on the table and bills paid. He thought little of the confrontation. To him, it was just a moment where he did what any decent man should. But to the waitress, it had meant much more. Her name was Elena, and though she kept it simple, never offering more than what her work demanded, her eyes lingered on Jack every time he came in afterward. She would refill his coffee, smile more gently, and once or twice, she even slipped his daughter an extra cookie without charging him. Gratitude lived in her gestures, though she said little about it. Jack wasn't the type to ask questions, but trouble has a way of finding those who stand up. 3 nights later, the diner door burst open, and the arrogant man in the suit returned, this time not alone. 2 men trailed behind him, built heavy and broad, the kind who weren't there to order burgers. The atmosphere shifted instantly, customers shrinking in their seats. Elena froze behind the counter, her knuckles white around the coffee pot. Jack looked up from his booth, his little girl beside him once again. His eyes hardened as the man's smirk widened. Well, the suited man drawled, stepping closer. The soldier and the waitress, you embarrassed me the other night. Nobody humiliates me in public and walks away clean. Jack stood slowly, motioning for his daughter to stay put. His voice was steady but firm. Leave her alone. You don't want to do this. The man laughed bitterly. Oh, I do. You see, I don't care what some washed-up veteran thinks he can do. I have money. I have power. Men like you, single fathers scraping by. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't have. Yelena's voice cracked as she finally spoke, her mask slipping. Stop this! You don't understand who I am? But the man cut her off with a cruel grin. I know exactly who you are, sweetheart, and that's why I want you. You think your daddy's billions scare me? If anything, it makes this more fun. The diner gasped. Jack froze, his mind processing her words. Billionaire's daughter. It clicked. The expensive watch Elena never wore but kept hidden in her bag. The way she sometimes looked at her car outside like she hated it. The sadness in her eyes that no ordinary waitress carried. She wasn't just escaping a normal life. She was running from privilege, from expectations, maybe even from men like the one in front of them. Elena's chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes darting to Jack as if pleading for him to understand. I didn't want anyone to know, she whispered. I just wanted a life of my own. Jack stepped forward, blocking the suited man from moving closer. Doesn't matter who she is, he said. You're not laying a hand on her. The man motioned to his bodyguards. Teach him what happens when you cross me. Time slowed. Jack's instincts, the ones honed on battlefields thousands of miles away, kicked in. He shifted his stance, his body lowering into a readiness that spoke of discipline, not rage. The first man lunged, but Jack sidestepped, using the man's weight against him, sending him crashing into a table. The second came swinging, but Jack blocked, striking back with precision, not brute force. Within moments, both bodyguards were groaning on the floor, the diner filled with stunned silence. Jack's little girl had climbed down from the booth, clutching her teddy bear, her wide eyes filled with pride. Daddy, she whispered, you're like a hero. The words pierced Jack's heart. He wasn't proud of the fight. Violence was never his first choice. But in that moment, He realized what mattered wasn't just standing up for Alina. It was showing his daughter what it meant to protect, to respect, to be strong in the right way. The suited man's face twisted in fury, but his arrogance faltered as the sheriff, alerted by a call from the diner's cook, walked in at that very moment. The law stepped between them, and the man, despite his threats of money and influence, was escorted out, humiliated once again. The diner exhaled in relief. Elena's eyes shimmered with tears as she turned to Jack. "You didn't just save me, you gave me back my courage. Do you know how rare that is? Men don't stand up to people like him. Even with my family name, I've felt powerless. But you," her voice broke, "you reminded me that dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from people like you." Jack didn't know what to say. He wasn't looking for gratitude, certainly not from someone who could buy and sell the entire town. But as his daughter hugged his leg, her little voice saying, "Daddy's the strongest man I know," Jack finally understood the truth. His life, though modest, wasn't lacking. He had what even billionaires' children search for: integrity, love, and purpose. In the weeks that followed, Elena's story spread. People discovered her true identity, but instead of running again, she chose to stay. She worked at the diner with more confidence, no longer hiding from her name, but redefining what it meant. She and Jack remained close, friends perhaps more. But what bound them wasn't wealth or power. It was respect, born in the moment he stood tall not for himself, but for someone who needed him. And Jack? He returned to his quiet life with his daughter, but something had shifted. He realized that the battles he fought now weren't about survival. They were about showing his little girl the kind of world worth believing in. A world where courage isn't loud, and respect isn't bought. It's earned. So when people whisper about the night a single-dad veteran confronted a rich man harassing a waitress, they don't just tell a story about a fight in a diner. They tell a story about dignity, about standing tall when it matters most, and about how one act of courage can ripple far beyond a single night. And that, my friends, is the kind of story that stays with you long after it ends.